The Fairy typing is known for its incredible strong Pokemon featuring Xerneas, Gardevoir, Olatapus, and many more. We're here to see if the Fairy typing is good enough to take me through all 200 waves of PokeRogue and defeat Eternatus. First things first is our starter selection, and I could not use any legendaries, so this means I couldn't use anything that had 6 or more cost to use. That being said, I decided to go with Togepi, which I had the passive and the hidden ability on, along with the tier 3 shiny, with Ralts, Mimikyu, and Mawile. Just 3 waves into our journey, I got a rare candy, which I gave to Togepi, evolving it into Togetic. On wave 30 was our first meaningful fight against Gym Leader Crasher Wake and his team of water types. Prinplup got sent out first, but it didn't really matter too much as Mimikyu's Spirit Shackle it down to just 1 HP. After just another Shadow Sneak, Prinplup goes down, and we are now up against Weasel. Weasel gets a critical hit one-tapped, and Quagsire comes out before getting Spirit broken to about 60% of its HP. This is okay though, as I just went for an Infestation in the next turn, meaning that Quagsire was going to take percentage damage after every turn. I do get put to sleep due to yawn, but as soon as I woke up, I went for a Shadow Sneak, taking Quagsire down to enough HP for the Infestation to kill, and that's how we beat Crasher Wake. After defeating Crasher Wake, our Ralts evolved into a Kirlia, which shiny looks absolutely amazing. A few ways later, I ended up getting the Shiny Stone, which let me evolve my Togetic into a Togekiss, giving a significant power spike, which ironically enough ended up leading into Kirlia, evolving once more into the elegant Gardevoir. And now our team was super powered and ready to take on our next challenge. Before we actually got to that next challenge though, we had to go against Ivy once again, which ended in a complete and utter massacre. On wave 60, it was time to fight against the water-type gym leader Marlin. Now, our Gardevoir has 2 fairy feathers on it, which means its fairy attacks do 40% more damage than it normally would. Combine this buff with a few Calm Minds, and all of a sudden, Dazzling Gleam is capable of annihilating almost anything, which is exactly what happened against this gym leader. Continuing our rampage against these gym leaders, it was time to fight the bug-type leader, Kathy. Now, this fight was a little bit harder because of Escavalier being a steel type, which is super effective against every single member of my team, except for Mawile. That being said, I send in Mawile and go for an Earthquake, which does way less than I thought, and Mawile goes down to just a single Iron Head. Mimikyu comes out and it hits a Fire Lash, which is quad effective, which means a one-shot guaranteed, before Ursaring gets sent out and Terras into the bug type. I kind of forgot that Terras were a thing at this point, so I didn't go for a Fire Lash immediately, but Lokix gets hit by the Fire Lash on the switch, meaning that it goes down the next turn without doing any damage. Rapska comes in and also gets hit with a Fire Lash before using Revival Blessing on Escavalier. This ended up being completely pointless as she switched into Escavalier during my Fire Lash, just killing it in just one turn. Spidops does come in and manages to lower my special attack, but Mimikyu's not a special attacker, so it means literally nothing, as it also goes down to Fire Lash. Rapska comes back in and lands an extra sensory, getting a couple boosts to its attack stats, before eventually going down to one last Fire Lash, prompting Ursaring to come in one last time. After one more Fire Lash, it wasn't quite enough to take down Ursaring, as Mimikyu does unfortunately fall to a Stone Edge, but it did a phenomenal job taking out almost every Pokemon on their team. Togekiss is able to come in and with just one Relic Song, that was more than enough to take down the bear and secure our victory. On wave 94, we encountered a Ribombee, which of course I was going to catch and add to our team because who doesn't love a good Ribombee? In fact, I love Ribombee so much that I ended up catching another one on wave 100. On wave 101, we entered the Fairy Cave, allowing us to find nothing but Fairy types for the next 10 waves. I caught an Aromatisse and replaced one of our Ribombees, but that didn't last too long as I ran into the Bink and immediately replaced Aromatisse because who doesn't love the Bink? On wave 120, I ran into the Gym Leader Olympia, which made the exact same fate as Marlon, allowing me to set up with Calm Minds against an unknown because why wouldn't a Gym Leader have probably the worst Pokemon in the game, before allowing me to just sweep using nothing but Dazzling Gleam. Turns out that a Fairy type's team's worst nightmare is a giant pile of trash because this ended up killing almost my entire team, ending the run. It was time for wave 145 and our first real fight against Ivy. Chestnut comes out and I already knew that I was going to Terrasilize because at this point is when it normally happens, but for the first time I've ever seen, instead of Terrasilizing on turn 1, she switches into Nidoking. That being said, Togekiss still has more than enough to take down Nidoking as I do have Scorching Sands due to its egg moves. Swallow comes out and I decide to just go for a Relic Song, which does end up one-shotting the other bird. Togekiss is slowly getting ticked down by poison, so she is on a timer, but it's okay as Tyranitar comes out, which means I got to hit one Relic Song before going down to poison. With T-Tar at a little bit under half, I decided that the best Pokemon for me to send out would actually be Gardevoir and just go for a Calm Mind. This worked out in my favor as Ivy switched into her own Gardevoir, and at this point I figured that they wouldn't be able to knock each other out just with normal attacks, so I decided to stack up as many Calm Minds as possible before going for a Dazzling Gleam, taking out their Fairy. At this point it was all but over as Shiny Rayquaza comes out and I just click Dazzling Gleam, one-shotting the mythical beast in quick work. Chestnut does end up coming back out, but due to its fighting type I went for Dazzling Gleam, completely forgetting about the Terrassalization because it didn't do it on turn 1. That being said, it didn't have enough power to one-shot Gardevoir, which meant that it, along with Tyranitar, went down to just a few Dazzling Gleams, confirming our victory against our rival Ivy. On wave 150, it was time to fight against Gym Leader Flannery, and this was by far the hardest gym fight that we possibly could have faced, as she has a full team of fire types, and fairy type moves do basically nothing to fire types. That being said, if I wanted to win this battle, I had to be very articulate with the way I switched through my Pokemon. After Rabambi got one-shot by Arcanine, I sent in Togekiss and used Scorching Sands, which was able to one-shot their Arcanine, before setting up a few setup moves against the Magcargo. I go for Carbink, knowing that my Cargo probably doesn't have a move that's able to one-shot it, and I was correct as I went for a couple Stealth Rocks along with a Reflect, setting up the rest of my team for just a few turns. After just a few Power Gems, my Cargo does manage to take down Carbink, and I send out Togekiss, knocking it out with just one more Scorching Sands. Delphox was a huge problem because I didn't really have anything that was fast enough or strong enough to take this thing out in just one turn. I do land a Scorching Sands with Togekiss before going down to my burn, and the last 3 Pokemon I had were not going to be the greatest against Delphox, as seeing as Mimikyu was burned, it wouldn't do very much damage. I decided to send Mawile and go for a Sucker Punch, seeing as I was wishing that it would one-shot the Fox, which it did, luckily. I decided to go for an Earthquake immediately after just to get some chip on the camera up before it goes for an Eruption, one-shotting my little Steel Fairy. I decided to send in Mimikyu, seeing as Gardevoir would probably just get one shot in this scenario, and go for a Spirit Break. This doesn't do very much damage to camera, but it does drop its special attack just in case it ended up going for Earthquake, taking Mimikyu out. But Flannery actually switches in Houndoom, which takes the Spirit Break to the dome, dropping its special attack. After just 3 back and forth turns of Spirit Break and Flamethrower, I was actually able to take down this Houndoom without taking too much serious damage to Mimikyu itself. Flannery decided to send in Torkoal immediately after, and I decided to go for one more Spirit Break, dropping Torkoal's special attack by just 1 stage. Torkoal does go for Eruption, one-shotting Mimikyu, as I send in Gardevoir. Now, if Gardevoir didn't one-shot the rest of Flannery's team, this run was over, but due to Terrassalization, I was able to go for a Terra-boosted Stab Psychic, which was enough to one-shot the last 2 Pokemon, giving us our victory against one of the hardest trainers we could have faced. Luckily for us, on Wave 180, we would not have to go through the same trials and tribulations, as we're just facing off against Marlon again. This battle ended very quickly as I was able to set up with Gardevoir and just go for Dazzling Gleams, one-shotting the rest of Marlon's team, giving us our final gym badge. It was now time for the Elite Four, and trust me, these 4 trainers were no pushovers, as our first battle was against the Fire-type Specialist. Pyro ends up going for a Flamethrower against our Gardevoir, but I tried setting up some Calm Minds, which I ended up immediately regretting as I get one shot by a Double Edge. We do have Mega Mawile now, which is a significant boost in strength from just regular Mawile, as now it has access to the ability Huge Power. I was able to one-shot the Pyroar before Ninetales comes in going for an Overheat, one-shotting my Mega Mawile in just 1 turn. I decided to go for Togekiss and go for a Scorching Sands, which does half of Ninetales HP, before it goes for a Will-O-Wisp, burning me. Getting burned with Togekiss doesn't really mean too much as it's a special attacker, so it kinda just wasted a turn on Will-O-Wisp. I do end up taking down the Ninetales after a few turns of Scorching Sands, as Talonflame goes in, and I was pretty sure I was just gonna die here, and I just went for a Reflect. Luckily for me, I actually didn't get one shot by Flare Blitz, and I was able to set up the Reflect, setting up the rest of my Pokemon to be a little bit more bulky. I decided to go for a Stealth Rock with Carbink, seeing as Talonflame didn't have a single move that would be super effective against the Bink. It ends up going for a Fly, but I just end up going for a couple of Rock Slides before eventually hitting it, taking it down to half HP. After one more Flare Blitz, I go for a Light Screen, and then another Rock Slide, taking down the bird in just a few turns. She then sends in Chandelure, which goes for a Torch Song that unfortunately was not enough to take down Carbink, as I go for a Rock Slide. Shadow Ball is enough to take down the Bink though, and Chandelure is left at just about half HP. I send in Mimikyu and go for a Shadow Claw, but she ends up switching into Torkoal, meaning that my Shadow Claw didn't do very much damage. But I knew from my previous fight with Flannery that going for Spirit Breaks against Torkoal was probably a good idea, dropping its special attack by just one stage. It goes for an Inferno, burning me in the process, which is horrible for Mimikyu because now I do basically no damage, as Mimikyu is a physical attacker. So then I decided to just go for Spirit Breaks, dropping the special attack of Torkoal down. That way my next Pokemon would be able to take it out without taking too much damage itself. Torkoal ended up going for Morning Sun, which completely demoralized me, but also allowed me to keep going for more Spirit Breaks, getting Torkoal down to -6 special attack. After a few turns of this back and forth of me spamming Spirit Break, eventually Torkoal did enough damage to take down Mimikyu, which meant I had to send out Ribombee, which was probably the worst Pokemon I possibly could have had left standing, and I decided to go for a Quiver Dance, seeing as Torkoal's special attack was down to -6. This was perfect because I was able to set up quite a few Quiver Dances, meaning that I should, theoretically, be able to one-shot every single remaining Pokemon on her team. Now, after setting up enough Quiver Dances to get +6 in every stat going from special attack, special defense to speed, I had nothing left to do but hope and pray that Pollen Puff was enough to one-shot the rest of their team. I did have the bug type held item, which boosts my bug damage by 20% on top of the +6 in every stat buff. This was enough to one-shot every single Pokemon remaining on her team, granting me my first victory against the first Elite Four member. Next up was Elite Four Cybold and his team of water types. He leaded with a Clawitzer, as I started with Ribombee, and I decided to go for a Quiver Dance on turn 1 before taking a Water Pulse, doing 159 damage to my Ribombee. I decided to go for a Pollen Puff, but I quickly regretted that decision as it wasn't enough to one-shot, meaning I could have just went for another Quiver Dance. This was okay though, as I was able to get one more Pollen Puff off, taking Barbaracle down to just half of its HP, before switching into Mega Wawile, going for a Bullet Punch. This ends up hitting Starmie on the switch-in, and I just go for a Sucker Punch, taking down the Starfish in just one hit. Dondozo comes out, and this beefcake was not going down to just a single play rough, despite Mega Wawile getting a critical hit. I decided to stay in with Mawile and just go for another play rough, which does take Dondozo down to about 5% of its HP. It goes for a Wave Crash before getting boosted by its berries, and I decide to send in Togekiss to just go in with a Relic Song, taking it out. This would have worked if Cybold didn't switch into Arctovish, taking the Relic Song pretty greatly, before going for a Vicious Rend, one-shotting my Carbink on the switch-in. I decided to go in with Gardevoir because it's my strongest Pokemon by far, and I go for Dazzling Gleam, which actually ends up taking out the Greninja on the switch. Arctovish comes back out and lands a Vicious Rend while taking Dazzling Gleam, taking Gardevoir down to below half health before one more Vicious Rend actually takes me out. I decided to go in with Togekiss, knowing I would outspeed, and a Relic Song was more than enough to take down the remaining health of the Arctovish. Barbaracle comes back out, and I go for another Relic Song, taking it down in just one hit, leaving Cybold down to just the 5 HP Dondozo, which does also go down with one more Relic Song. The next Elite Four member we had to face was Wikstrom and his team of Steel types. Now this Elite Four was extremely difficult, as both a Fire and Steel type leader was not ideal for my team of Fairies, but it's okay, we'll persevere anyways. I lead with Togekiss and land a Scorching Sand on the Klefki before going for a Reflect against the Corviknight. I switch into Mimikyu, which takes a Behemoth Blast to the face pretty well due to its disguise ability, before going for a Fire Lash, taking Corviknight's defense down by one stage while getting it to almost half HP. This allowed Fire Lash to kill on the next turn, forcing Wikstrom to send out his Excavalier, which gets taken down to just 1 HP by another Fire Lash. Iron Head does land a crit, and it's super effective, taking down our Mimikyu in just one turn, as our Reflect wears off. I send in Togekiss and decide to go for a Scorching Sands, as Excavalier goes down in just one turn due to it being about 1% HP. Aegislash comes in and goes for, as I go for a Reflect, before it hits me with an Iron Head, taking me down to just 96 HP. A Scorching Sands actually manages to burn and take Aegislash down to half HP, significantly nerfing its damage output. Mega Mawile comes in and lands a Sucker Punch on the Aegislash, taking it down in just one turn, before getting high horsepowered by the Kling Clang on the next turn. I was in fact able to take it down with an Earthquake in just one turn though, as Klefki comes back out and I go for another Earthquake, taking down the pair of keys. Wikstrom was down to just a couple of Pokemon, and Chestnut was the last one I had to face. Combat Torque does manage to paralyze me on impact, but a single Earthquake from Mega Mawile is enough to take Chestnut down to 1 HP before he gets fully paralyzed, as Chestnut heals back up to half HP. Chestnut only goes down to about a quarter HP before Mawile goes down, but we still have 3 Pokemon remaining. Ribombee goes down after hitting a Pollen Puff, leaving Chestnut on 1% HP, as I send in Gardevoir and hope that I can outspeed, which I do and take it down with just 1 Dazzling Gleam, giving us our victory against the Steel-type Elite Four leader. At this point, this run's looking pretty good and I'm very confident. My confidence was only boosted further as our final opponent was Elite Four Drasna. Now, her team of Dragon types was about as you expect, as I just one-shot every single one of them. So, thanks for the boost, I guess. It was time to see if my confidence would be boosted further by the champion Diantha. She led out with her Hawlucha, which I didn't think would be able to hit me for very much damage, but it had access to Headlong Rush, taking down Mawile to just 88 HP. A Play Rough was more than enough to take down Hawlucha in 1 turn though, as Diantha sends in her Gourgeist. I decided to go for a Sucker Punch, thinking that it would actually one-shot, but it didn't, as Mawile goes down to just a single Spirit Shackle. At this point, I just sent in Ribombee and predicted a switch due to Gourgeist's Grass typing, which is exactly what happened. Xerneas actually comes out, which I'm pretty sure Diantha did not have access to in the X and Y series, but I digress. I go for a few more Quiver Dances before going for a Dazzling Gleam, due to Xerneas' Fairy Aura. Pollen Puff did less than Dazzling Gleam, so on the 3rd turn, I went back to my roots, and I ended up taking down the legendary Deer. Gardevoir came out, and I decided to go for a Pollen Puff, which was able to take down Mega Gardevoir down to just half HP. At this point, I decided to send in my Mimikyu, seeing as its Disguise ability would make it to where Gardevoir could not one-shot me no matter what. I went for a Shadow Claw, which was more than enough to take down Gardevoir in just 1 turn, getting rid of her Mega. Tyrantrum came out and ended up terrestrializing into the Dragon type, losing its Rock type resistances and weaknesses. This was still fine for me though, as I had a full team of Fairy types, so a pure Dragon type was probably the best thing that could have happened to me. Head Smash does unfortunately take down Mimikyu, but I sent in Gardevoir and my Quick Claw actually procced, giving me the speed boost I needed to one-shot Tyrantrum with just a single Dazzling Gleam. Gourgeist comes back out and goes straight back down to a Psychic, after hitting my Gardevoir with a Spirit Shackle, taking me down to about 15% HP. Goodra was Diantha's last Pokemon, and it was not beefy enough to surpass Gardevoir and her Dazzling Gleams, giving me the victory against the champion Diantha, setting me up for just the final trainer battle in the game. For those of you who have played this game before, you know that Wave 195 is arguably the hardest wave in the entire game, as we're going against our rival Ivy for the final time. She leads with her Chestnut, which she has always switched into Tyranitar, so I decided to just go for her Calm Mind before going for a Dazzling Gleam, taking down the dragon in just 1 turn. She sends out her own Gardevoir, and I decided to take this opportunity to beef up my own Gardevoir just 1 more time before going for a Dazzling Gleam, allowing me to one-shot her Fairy. She sends in Nidoking as I go for Psychic, outspeeding, critting, and one-shotting the Nidoking in just 1 turn. Gardevoir has swept 3 for Pokemon so far, as Swellow comes out and I was a little bit scared, seeing as Brave Bird would outspeed and one-shot my Fairy. This is exactly what happened, and I decided to send in Carbink, seeing as Swellow probably couldn't do much to it. I set up both Stealth Rocks, and I wanted to go for a Light Screen, but Chestnut actually came out and terrestrialized. Carbink somehow survived a Seed Bomb from this thing, so I was able to land a Toxic before going down to another Seed Bomb on just the very next turn. We did put Chestnut on a timer though, which meant that we didn't really have to worry too much about it. I decided to go for a Quiver Dance on Ribombee as Ivy switches back into Swellow. The burn on Swellow is actually terrible because it activates its Guts ability before it heals and gets reactivated by another Flame Orb. This was okay though, as I was able to set up and use Dazzling Gleam, one-shotting the bird before taking any damage. Mega Rayquaza comes in and goes down to just its final health bar from a Dazzling Gleam from our Ribombee. Ribombee is notorious for fighting extremely strong opponents, like Ultra Necrozma, before going down to Rayquaza. Chestnut comes back out and I send Mawile in to do just a little bit of damage before switching into Mimikyu, dodging the Combat Torque with its Ghost typing. I decided to just go for a Protect with Mimikyu, allowing the Toxic to chip down Chestnut a little bit more. My disguise was eventually busted, but it was okay, as I went for a Fire Lash, taking down Chestnut to just a little bit of HP, before going for another Protect, meaning that Chestnut would go down to its poison. Carbink was really the hero of this battle, as without Toxic, I'm not too sure I would have been able to take down that Chestnut. Rayquaza comes back in as I just go for Protect, which was honestly a really terrible idea because all that did was allow Rayquaza to eat a bunch of its berries. This meant that Rayquaza actually outsped Mimikyu on the next turn, taking me down in just one hit. It did lose some defense stats before its speed rose sharply, but I have a Mega Mawile with Sucker Punch, so the Mega Rayquaza just went down, and we defeated Ivy on wave 195. It was now time for the moment of truth, as we face off against Eternatus for the final battle of this run. Our team of fairy types has surpassed a lot of challenges so far, and honestly, I felt as if Eternatus wasn't going to be the hardest of them all. I decided to go with Carbink and set up just a little bit before going for a Moonblast, taking Eternatus' first HP bar down to about 30%. Now this doesn't seem like a lot, but any damage is good damage, especially against Eternatus, as I decided to go for a Calm Mind with Gardevoir after getting hit with a Sludge Bomb for about half of my HP. The Calm Mind did allow me to take another Sludge Bomb and use Psychic, taking down Eternatus down to its Eternamax form. Now this was great for me, as Gardevoir was still alive, paired with the other 4 of my Pokemon, which meant that I had a pretty decent chance at taking down this Eternatus. I decided to go for Life Dew with Togekiss, healing my Gardevoir back up from that 10% HP bar, but it didn't really matter as Gardevoir gets cross-poisoned straight into Oblivion. Now, the rest of my team was pretty decent against Eternatus, but the fact that it had access to cross-poison was a huge problem, as poison types are super effective against Fairy. It decides to go for a Flamethrower on Mimikyu, which I guess didn't matter too much due to my disguise ability. I go for an Infestation, which if you guys watched my last video, you know just how good Infestation really is, especially against Eternatus. At this point, I decided that the best thing I could do was try to stall while chipping away little by little at Eternatus. As long as I could keep Mimikyu alive, that meant the Infestation would keep going and keep eating at Eternatus until eventually it would go down. So with a combination of Fire Lashes and Protects, Mimikyu would have the best chance of surviving for a very long time, as I decided to just keep healing up with Life Dew with Togekiss. Eternatus does go for a Cross Poison on my Togekiss, taking it down to about 10% HP before Life Dew heals it back up to a little bit under half. At this point, Mimikyu and Togekiss are doing great as a duo, getting Eternatus down to below half health before Togekiss does unfortunately go down to a Cross Poison. This is okay though, as I still have 2 Pokemon left that are both pretty decent against Eternatus. Infestation actually wore off, which I didn't know was possible, as I go for another one with Mimikyu, as luckily for me, Eternatus goes for Rabombi. This meant that I got another Infestation off before sending in Mawile, and my last 2 Pokemon were standing up against Eternamax Eternatus. I go for Protect, which not only protects myself from the Cross Poison from Eternatus, but also Mawile's Earthquake, which is super effective against both Mimikyu and Eternatus. This was the final turn of the game, and all I had to do was make sure that I hit this Eternatus. Flamethrower takes down Mawile, but it's okay as I go for one more Fire Lash as Infestation takes down Eternatus, and that is exactly how I beat PokeRogue using only Fairy type Pokemon. Thank you guys so much for making it to the end of the video. I really do appreciate it, and please let me know what type of PokeRogue content you want to see next, or maybe it's another type of Pokemon game you want to see me play. I am actually planning on making a Pokemon Champions video, which did just release yesterday as of me doing this voiceover, and I look very forward to playing it and showing you guys what type of teams I like to make, as they're not exactly the most comp. But that being said, thank you so much for watching. Please hit the subscribe button, hit that like button for more, and yeah, have a great day, night, whenever you're watching. Peace.